Hey guys, this is Mitch with Finepoint CGI, and today we're going to update our level loading system. So I got a lot of feedback in my previous C# tutorial where people were like, hey, why don't you do X? Or how do you carry data over from scene to scene? How do we spawn our player? How do we link up our doors? Things like that. So we're going to do that. So we're going to make it so that we carry our items over from one scene to another. So that's going to carry our player over, carry all of our data over, things like that. We're going to go in and actually set up a door index system so that way you can actually open up a door and then spawn into the next level and link that door with the previous door. So if you turn around and you open up that door, you will spawn right where you would expect as if you opened up that door and walked through it. And finally, we're going to set it up so that our player actually gets spawned on startup instead of how we had it before where our player was actually set in our level 1 wake up. Instead, he's going to actually be spawned on startup. That's going to make our system a lot more flexible and level independent. So that's what I have in store for you guys today. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so the first thing that we have to talk about is basically the project structure. So previously, when we were doing our project, we actually just threw everything underneath our level loading system, if I remember correctly. So basically, if we head into our loading screen here, you'll see that we have our change scene section right here, where what we're doing is we're grabbing our root tree node, we're looping through each of our root trees. We're basically checking if it is a type of an item, and then we are getting rid of it. And a lot of people pointed out, hey, that's not the most ideal way of solving the problem, and there's probably a better way to handle that. And you are totally correct. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to change all of this to kind of mimic a better system. We're actually going to break this into different segments, if that makes sense. So first, to do that, we're going to need to make a new scene. So we'll go to scene, new scene. We're going to go into other node. We're going to type node, and we're going to call this game base. And then we're going to right click, add in a child node. We'll add in another node, and we'll call this level base. Like that. Then we're going to right click, add another child node, add in another node, and we will add in a player node. Now, we need to get global references to both the player base, which I should probably call this player base. I think that would be easier. We need to get a reference to our player base, and we need to get a reference to our level base. Now, there are multiple ways to do this, and it's completely up to you. And I'm going to show you both ways to do it just so that you understand the differences between them. So the first one is basically telling this guy to register with our game manager. So the easiest way to do that is to right click, attach a script, and call it levelbase.cs, and you'll see that you have this right here. And then we can say public override void underscore ready. And then we can basically just say game manager dot instance dot, and you'll notice that we don't have anything for our player. So we'll just right click our game manager, peek at our definition. We'll come down here and say public node level base, like so. And we'll say dot level base is equal to this, just like that. And that'll give us the flexibility that we're looking for. And that's one of the nice things about Visual Studio is that I could just kind of do it right here. Now, also, if we wanted to, we could say public node player base as well, if we wanted to go that route. Or if you want to, since player base and level base will technically be the only one of their kind, we could go into node groups and just say player base and then grab it via our group. So those are our options. Now, what is game base, level base, and player base? Well, game base is our base scene, so everything's going to run underneath that scene. Level base is where all of our level items are going to be located. So any of our mesh, any of our things like that are going to be under here. And then finally, the player base. And player base makes it so that your player is underneath that section as well. This basically allows us to carry things across scenes. And we could do the same thing for like UI base or any of the other things that we may want to carry between our scenes. So what this will do is it will actually allow us to switch out our level without getting rid of anything else. And that's the goal with this adjustment to our system. Now, what we'll need to do is we're going to come into our level base. I'm going to come down into, I believe it's my UI. It's actually my main menu, which I should probably drag this up into my UI. This whole thing needs to be reorganized. It's not organized very well. But I'm going to grab this guy. I'm going to drag my main menu.tscn up into my level base. And I'm going to hit Control S and save this as gamebase.tscn. Now, the reason why I'm putting my main menu here is because it's going to queue free at the end anyway, and I'm not concerned with it getting deleted. And when we hit play, this is going to be our base scene. This is going to be the scene that starts the entire project. So we can just go ahead and give it the main menu. Now, we could instance this through code. We could do a bunch of fancy stuff. But to me, this is a pretty simple way of handling it. Now we just need to update our actual level loading code. So what we'll do is we'll head over to our Visual Studio here, and we'll come into, I believe it's our loading screen. We'll come in here, and instead of saying var root, node is equal to get tree root, for each var item get tree root, which technically, yeah, I needed this because it was getting rid of the reference, if I remember correctly. I was going to say, I don't think we need this, but it looks like we probably, so what we can do is we can just say var root, Control RR, root level node. And then we can say game manager dot root dot instance dot root level base. I see. So I'm going to have to use level base. So Control RR level base like that. And honestly, I'm thinking about it. We probably don't even need this. We could actually just go level base dot add child like so. And then for each var item in root.getChildren, instead GameManager.instance.levelBase. And I'm not worried about this check anymore. To me, that's completely useless. So we'll just do that. And then we'll basically just do that as well. And I think I've said this before, but with queuing free, you don't need to actually do this. But I like to do this because to me, it's just a little bit easier for me to understand what's going on. Technically, I believe you could just get away with queue free and it would work. So this is technically an inefficiency, but I just like it that way for style purposes. It makes things a little easier for me to understand what's going on. Now, then we instance our resource and we add it to our level base, and then we pause our stuff, or we shut off our pause, and then we queue free. I think that will work. Now, something that we're going to have to look at is much like before, I believe, let me see. We're going to need to actually move our player underneath our player base. So basically, we have our player located inside. If I close all of my scenes and I open up level 1 wake up, and we head over there, you'll see that we have our player right here. Now, our player needs to actually exist outside of the scene, right? He needs to exist in their own space. They actually need to exist in our game base. But we can't just have our player right here, because if we do on startup, then the game will go, oh, there's a player here, so you'll have your first person controller just kind of sitting there, and your character will just basically be falling through space. And we don't really want that either. So what we have to do is on level load, we need to check if our player exists, and if it doesn't, then we can go ahead and spawn it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete my player, get rid of him, and then I'm going to go into my game manager. I'm pretty sure my game manager will be able to handle this. You can see we're loading our level right here. So what we can do, and actually you can see right here, we're loading a level, load scene node, instantiate as loading scene, get tree root. We actually need to change that to GameManager.instance.levelBase.addChild. So that's something that we completely missed, but that's okay. And actually, I think we can just get away with level base because it's going to be the correct instance. So that's something that we also need to update. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to have a public void check for player. And I'm going to check for my player. Now, we don't really have a way to check for our player. We could go ahead and grab all the instances of the players by their group and just say, hey, grab the player in the group, right? But that's not the most ideal way. So what we should do is we should actually come up here and just say public player, and then come down here and just say if player is equal to null, then do this bit of stuff. Right? And all we have to do is just basically instance our player. So we can just say var player packed scene is equal to resource loader.load. And we'll need to get a reference to wherever our player is going to be. So we could either come in here and hard code it. So we can come in here and say, if I remember correctly, players are under scenes. Yep. So we can grab this guy like this and hard code it like so. Or we could grab this guy, just come up here and say public string player scene path is equal to that. And then we could just pass in our player scene path. Now, you aren't going to get much benefit going either direction. The nice thing about this is that it can be changed up here, and I don't have to scroll through my code to find it. So a lot of times I'll just make variables up here because it'll just be easier for me to change my stuff. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, once I have that, I can just come down here and say player is equal to player packed scene.instance, which is not going to let me. So I have to say as a packed scene, so that way it casts it, dot instantiate as player. And then we can just add our player as our child of our game base right here, of our little player base. So we can say get tree dot get nodes in group, quote, player base. I believe that's what we called it. Let's double check. Player base, we did. So we'll say player base. We'll pull back the first instance because it should never have a second instance ever. So we'll pull back the first instance, add child, and then player. And there we go. And in theory, if we've done this correctly, this should just work. Let's check real quick. I think, yeah, that should work. I don't like how this is set up, so I'm actually going to make a quick audible adjustment. So we'll come in here and we'll say public string we'll do that. And then we'll say main menu first level load, and I'm going to export this guy out. There we go. And that'll just give me a bit more flexibility. So if I build this, which hopefully everything will build properly. It never does the first time, so let's see what's going on. Semicolon is expected. That's fine. We can add that. Build. Now when we click on our main menu, we'll have our menu location that we can just update if we ever need to. Technically, we could probably make this a node path, I think it is, and that might work better. So that'll give us a nice flexible way to update our stuff. But if we hit play, when we click start game, you'll see that, well, not much happened, right? So what's going on? Well, if we take a look at our remote, we have our game base, we have our level base. It looks like our player did not spawn. Our level did spawn. Our main menu did not finish doing whatever it was going to do. And my guess is I'm not calling the function that I wrote because I am dumb. So let me see. So if we go out to our loading screen, load level, we come in here. When we do our change scene, we actually set our child right here. So we can just go game manager dot instance dot check for player like so, and then see if that will work. So we'll hit play, start game, and there we go. We've spawned in, well, in the wrong location, but we did spawn, and that is the goal, right? That's what we want, is we want to have spawned. So good, awesome. So now the question is, okay, I spawned, but how do I get my character back into their location, which is over here, right? The player wants to spawn here. So how do we get them to spawn at this location? Now, to move our player, we're going to need to basically keep track of a position inside of our level 1 wake up. And the beauty of this is also going to be really big for our actual door system as well, because one of the big struggles that you guys had with the doors was, hey, you know, like this just loads a level, right? How do we know if we're going to load into a location, right? And how are we going to actually keep track of all of that? So what we'll do is we'll basically just have a spawn location, or basically like a node that says, hey, this is a spawn location, if that makes sense. So we'll come in here, we will right click our node 3D, add in a child node, and add in a, I believe it's called a point, or maybe it's not a point. It is a, what did they call it? Marker 3D. So we'll add in a marker 3D. Originally, if you guys pay attention to both of my tutorial series, you'll notice that the first one, I actually did a node 3D, and this time I'm doing a marker 3D. Now, the reason why I'm doing a marker 3D for the C# version is because after some discussion with some other community members, a marker 3D actually shows something in 3D space. So if you drag this guy up just a tiny bit, you can see it actually has a visual representation, whereas a node 3D does not. So it's not going to affect the code any at all. It really doesn't matter, but this is useful. So that's the reason why I wanted to do it this way. And I'm going to name it spawn index. So I'm going to right click this. I'm going to attach a script, and we're going to call it spawnindex.cs. Now, what we need to do is we need to create some kind of index so we know where we're spawning. So we'll just come in here and we'll say export public int index, and we'll default that to 0. So when we build this, you'll see that when we click on our spawn index, providing that it built, which it looks like it did, but our editor's not updating. Oh, there we go. So you can see we have an index value. So we can basically pull back this index and say, hey, here is where I want to spawn, right? Now, you might be asking, okay, but why not just grab this guy, drop it into a group, and then basically just fetch the first element, right? Because we know that our spawn index is going to have an element of some description. We can just use that. Well, here's why. So you are correct. We need to go into our node, and we do need to add in a spawn index group like that. But the reason why is because we're going to link our doors to our spawn indexes. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I open up Paint, which I might still have it open, I do not. We'll open up Paint, and you'll see, you're going to see my beautiful drawing skills. So if we have a door here, and we have another door here, so a different level, let's say L1 and L2, right? So we have 2 doors. When we go from L1 to L2, we want to come out of this door. So how do we know that L1 is equal to L2's door? Well, what we'll have is we'll have a level name, right? Which will be a value that says L2, and then we'll have an index, which will point to our door's spawn point right here. So there'll be a spawn point like this, and there'll be a spawn point like this, which will be our spawn index. So our spawn index, so you'll see L1, we'll say this is index 1, and this is index 2. So this door will say level name is L2, index is 2, and then when you go into this guy, their name will be L1, and their index will be 1. And that will link us back to here. So if you go into this door, it will take you to this door. If you go into this door, it'll take you to this door, if that makes sense. So in order to have that happen, I need to make sure that these guys are all part of a group, and I need to actually update my door, which is right here, load level door, to actually have that spawn index. So I'm going to right click this, add a child node, And I'm going to add in a marker 3D. And actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I'm going to actually get rid of my marker 3D. I'm going to right click my spawn index. I am going to go ahead and save branch as scene. And I'm going to call it spawn index. I'm going to go into that scene. I'm going to zero this guy out, which is something that, you'd think I would learn after doing however many tutorials I've done. I'm going to go back to here and you'll see that my spawn index was moved. So I'm going to remove it back to where it should be over here, like so. And you'll notice that I'm holding control, and that's just because I want to snap it into place. That's going to make life a little bit easier for me. And I will put my character just like that, being careful not to actually have my character clip into anything, because you don't want them to clip into anything, because that could be a big problem. So now I can go into my load level door. I can grab my spawn index, which is down here. I'll drag it up into here, and I will hit control and control to snap it out like this. And that should work. Now you'll notice that my door is slightly above. We'll just pull that down just a tiny bit. There we go. That looks a little bit better. I'm going to right click my load level door, and I'm actually going to save branch as scene, and I'm going to save it as load level door. Now I'm going to go in here. I'm going to once again zero this out, because you would think as time has gone on that I would have learned to do that before I make my scene. So I'm going to have to drag this guy back. I don't know why I do that to myself, but every single time I make that mistake. So we'll drag this guy back into the correct spot, which is perfect. That's what we want. And now we have a scene that will work for our spawn. Now you'll notice that I have a hover over text and a level to load. Now that's great, but we also need an index, right? We need to tell it where we're going to spawn. So we need to go into our load level door, hit yes, and we'll come in here and say export index, like that. And we're going to default that to 0, so that way it is defaulted. And then I'm just going to grab my node, so get node marker 3D. We're going to grab our spawn, I believe it's called spawn index. And then we're going to say dot. And actually, we need to make this not a marker 3D. This isn't, this is C#, not GD script. So we actually need to say, instead of marker 3D, it would be, I believe it's a spawn index. So spawn index, dot index is equal to my index. And that way, we don't have to come into here to change our index. We can just change our index in our load level door. That's going to give us a lot more flexibility, and it's going to make things a lot simpler. Now remember, this door is going to point to the door that it is going to. And what I mean by that is if we look at our load level door, you can see we have hover over text, level to load, index is 0. Okay? And I know that this is recursively getting more complicated, so we're going to go back up to spawning our player on the proper index in 1 second. So once we have this, we're ready to actually set up our spawning system. So once we have this, we basically want to say, okay, we have our ability to load a level. We know what index we're going to. Okay. And what we can do is we can basically just say, all right, let's walk backwards through our code. So first things first, we have to be able to move our player. So if we come into our game manager here, we can say public void move player, and we'll pass in an index, which will be an integer. Lowercase I, there we go. And what we'll do is we'll just say list of nodes is equal to get tree dot get nodes in group spawn index, like that. And we'll need to cast it as a list of nodes. And it might get mad at us. It might say that we might not be able to do that because of boxing reference. Yep, of course. It always does that. So let me see. We might have to just use the Godot collections array, as much as I don't want to use it, because I try to avoid the Godot collections array because it's really painful to work with. So we'll say Godot.collections.array and it's still mad at us. Cannot implicitly convert a Godot collections array node to Godot collections array. So we'll pass in a node like that, and that should work. I don't like using these because lists are C# types. Godot arrays are Godot arrays. So basically my struggle with it is Godot arrays are not lists. So I can't do a lot of the fancy stuff that I can do with lists, like doing link and things like that. So for just iterating, it's fine. But for doing things a bit more complicated, it becomes cumbersome really, really fast. So I try to avoid using Godot collection arrays if I can. So next, we'll just say for each var item in nodes. Then I'll say if item.index, which you'll notice that it's not really picking it up, right? And that's because this is a type of node, not a type of index. But I can't just say spawn index because Godot's going to get mad. It's going to say, hey, you can't do that, right? So here's where things get kind of painful, and this is the reason why I don't necessarily like how these things work. So you have to say if item is spawn index, then you can go ahead and say if spawn index dot index is equal to index, then we could do what we're trying to do, which will be player dot global position is equal to spawn index dot global position, like so, and then player dot global rotation is equal to spawn index dot global rotation. And that'll basically set up our global position and our rotation of our player so that it just works for what we're trying to use it for. Now, this means that we have to call this function somewhere. So the easiest way to call this function is actually with our loading screen. So if we go to our loading screen, you'll see here we're checking for our player. And once we know that we have our player and we're good, right? Then we can say, okay, we're good. We can now move our players. So GameManager.instance.move player, and we have to pass it an index. So now things are going to get complicated, right? Because we have to pass in some kind of index of some description. But that doesn't exist, right? But that doesn't exist. So what can we do? So we could pass it into here, but if we do that, you can see here we have our input, change scene, load threaded get as pack scene, blah, 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 change scene, blah, 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 right? But we can't just pass in our index like that because, well, that means we'd have to pass in our index here. And unfortunately, Godot doesn't allow us to do that, right? Because it's an input, so it's a Godot function. So we need to actually say, hey, all right, we're going to have to hold on to a reference to our index. So we'll just head up here and say private int index, because it's going to be private. We don't need to access it anywhere. And actually, I'm going to come down here and update our name because I did a capital I. I was thinking I was going to make it public, but I don't think I'm going to need to. So we'll make that an index. And then when we do our load level, we'll just set our index right here. We'll just say this.index is equal to something. That means that because we're setting our index here when we load our level, we're going to have to pass in an index. So we'll say comma int index like that. And then we'll have to look at our references, and you'll see we have a bunch of references here. So we're going to have to update those references as well. So game manager will have to come in here and pass in an index. So comma index. But that means that we're going to have to come in here, comma int index. You can see how updating something means it's going to have downstream effects. So we have to come through and say, okay, well, now we're going to come over to our load level object and say, all right, how are we going to pass in our index? Well, thankfully, at this point, our recursion going back up is done because we have our index right here. So great. So we'll hit Control S, and we'll hit Control S, and we'll hit Control S. Actually, we should probably just save all. And then if we come to Godot and we click build, we'll probably have a build error. So we'll click build, and we do, because of course we do. There's no argument given that corresponds to required parameter index of load level string int. And that is when we do our main menu. So we'll hit comma 0 because we know that we want, when we do our first level load, we want to start at our first index, right? Because we have 0 reason not to. So now, after all of that work, in theory, this should just work. So we can hit play. All right, good sign. We'll hit start game. We've loaded, spacebar, and we've spawned at our location. We spawned in the wrong rotation. Our character was facing this way instead of this way. So we have to fix that. So how can we fix that? Well, that's actually pretty simple. We'll just come to our spawn index right here, and we'll just rotate it 180 degrees, like that. And we'll want to do the same thing for our load level door. If you look at our spawn index, you can see there's a red line right here. And that red line determines the direction your player is going to be facing. If we look at this guy, you can see that the Z right here is facing this direction, and it's facing this direction. The X is facing this way. So we want our player to be facing this way, which means that we want our red to be to the right, and we want our Z to be facing backwards. So if we look at this guy on our load level door, you can see that our guy is going to face this direction. And we don't want that. So we're going to rotate it 90 degrees, and that should solve that problem. And now all we have to do is set up our load level door to work. Thankfully, all of the code is basically done. All we have to do is create a new level. So I'm not going to go through the process of just creating a whole new level. That's going to be a lot of work. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab my level BSP. I'm going to copy it, go into scene, new scene, go to a 3D scene, paste in my level BSP. You can see it has my entire level right here. I'm going to pull my bedroom out. Well, I think I'll pull out my children's bedroom, so we'll get rid of that guy. That can just go. We can get rid of these guys. They can also go. There's no need for that. We'll just basically make a small hallway. So I'm going to come in here, control duplicate this, control, drag, grab this guy, get rid of this, and I think that will do it there. And then I'm going to grab all of basically this bedroom and delete that as well. I'll get rid of this little Omni light. I'm going to grab this guy and this guy. So my door and my load level door, I'm going to control duplicate them. I'm going to rotate it 90 degrees, and I will hit control and snap it over here. So that way we have our level hopefully all settled. There we go. And that should just work. So now all we have to do is just say, okay, load level 2 door. I want it to go to level 1 wake up. It's going to go to index 0. Load level door. It's going to go to level 1 wake up, index of 1. And I'm going to control S and call this level 2 hallway. And I will put that in my levels. Save. I'm going to go into my levels real quick. Right here, level 2 hallway. I'll just grab that RES. And then what I'll do is I have my level 2 hallway. I'm going to go into my level 1 wake up scene right here. I'm going to go into this guy here, my load level door. I'm going to say, hey, you're going to go to level 2 hallway, and your index is going to be, and now that I think about it, I'm curious if this is going to work. So I have an index here. We'll say 1, and then we'll go into our load level 2 hallway. We'll put this guy at index level 1, and that in theory should work. This will take us back to our spawn location. This should take us back to our door. And this should, yeah, so this should work. So what we'll do is we'll hit our game base, we'll hit play. We'll hit start game, spacebar. We'll run forward like so. The door's going to open. We'll hit E, loading our hallway, spacebar. We are in our hallway. You can see this is our hallway. We are in the correct location. So we'll hit E, go back, and we are back in our hallway. We'll come back here, E. We'll come forward, E, and there we go. And that's pretty much the gist of our level loading system. Surprisingly, it wasn't so bad to change, but it can be a little bit on the difficult side. So the idea, if you wanted to separate these, you could, by the way. The idea behind this is that this index will match our level 2 hallway index, so this index here. So basically, using the system the way it is, level 1, this door index is linked to this door index. So you can see how it has index of 1, level 1 wake up, level 2 hallway. So they are permanently linked to each other. Now, if you wanted to separate these two, you totally could. And that would give you a little bit more flexibility. That way, if you wanted to have 2 doors that link to 1 door and then 1 door linked to just 1 door, you could do that. And that way you could have some kind of like mind games almost. And to achieve that, you would basically just say export target index, and you'll just set that to 0. And then you can come down here and pass in target index like that. And then if you build, all that's going to do is just change it so that, well, if it doesn't fail, I need my semicolon because this is C#. So when you build this, you can come in here and say, hey, I want my target index to be 1. I want my index to be 1. And then when I go into my level 2 hallway, I can say, I want my index to be 1. I want my target index to be 1. And then with level 2 door, this guy, I want my target index to be 1 and my index to be 0. That way, any door that loads level 2 hallway and is looking for index 0 will come out of here. But if I come into here, it's going to load level 1 wake up index 1, if that makes sense. Now, I don't necessarily suggest this, but it is something that's going to be asked, so I wanted to make sure that I cover it just in case. So you'll see we come in here, space, go back, space, I'm in here, space. If I come forward, I come out here. If I go back in, I end up back in the same location that I was in. So I actually load back at the level 2 hallway. Now, of course, you could keep track of what index you left out of as well, and that is something else that you could do, and you could update the target index. That way the player gets kind of stuck, if that makes sense. But I don't really know if that's necessary for this specific tutorial. But that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. So if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. Hey, you know, if you dislike this video, go ahead and hit that dislike button because I'm here to make content for you guys. This video, as with every one of my videos in my entire channel, was viewer suggested. So if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments below and I'll be more than happy to add it to my future tutorial list. I have so much going on with all the tutorials and ideas and things like that I'm running through. So I will get to your suggestion. Eventually, it does take a lot of time. Next for this tutorial series, I'm going to do a crafting system that needs to be built. I'm going to do a note-taking system or a note pickup system, so you could pick up a note and read it. And I believe I'd like my enemy to be able to kill me, so I think that will be a fun thing to build as well. We'll probably have to go through our entire enemy code and refactor it anyway, so it'd be really good for us to go that route and, you know, clean it up. But if you guys have any questions, please hit me up in the comments below, and I'll be more than happy to help you out, or jump on my Discord. Link is in the description. And anybody on that Discord's more than happy to help you out with any issues you might be having. But that is all I have for you guys today. So thank you so much again for watching. I'll see you all next time. Thanks.